I have 6, Sharon. Do we want to get started or?
Yeah, I think we'll go ahead and get started with introductions. So thank you for joining us for our third of our Wildfire Wednesday series. My name is Sharon Boken. I'm with CSU Extension in Boulder County, and I will let my 2 other co-hosts that help put this together introduce themselves. So Karen.
Hi, everyone. We're so happy that you're evening. My name is Karen Crumbaker, and I'm with CSU Larimer County Extension.
Hi, I'm Mari Johnson, the Natural Resource Agent for Extension in Jefferson County. Thanks for being here tonight.
So thanks for joining us. We will tell you that due to the number of people that we anticipate having on this webinar, you will be muted during the presentation. If you would like to ask a question, if you kind of take your pointer down to the bottom of the screen, you will see a little chat icon down there. You can go ahead and type your question in there, and we will be collecting those, and we'll have questions about midway through the presentation and then again at the end of the presentation. If you have any problems using that chat feature, you might take note of Karen, Mari, and my email address. Please feel free to email us if you're having problems with that. Other than that, we'll go ahead and get started. So our speaker today, we absolutely love her. We're sad that she's so far away from us these days. We don't get to see her as often. Is Dr. Irene Shonle. She's currently the Horticulture Program Associate for CSU Extension down in El Paso County. She was formerly the Extension Director in Gilpin County, where she did an extensive amount of education on fire safety, emergency preparedness, creating defensible spaces, as well as education on and the use of native plants in landscaping situations. So we'll turn it over to you, Irene, and let you start your presentation.
Great. Well, thank you very much for that introduction, and thank you all for joining us tonight. It's definitely, I think these 3 were very prescient in developing this series since we've had so many fires since they even started the planning of this. So anyway, I will get started with my presentation. And so tonight, hopefully, will be a little bit of a more lighthearted, or sort of fun topic, because I know we've been having a lot of discussion about, just fire behavior and defensible space and all of that. And so this is how, I created this because when I was in Gilpin County, there were just so many people who really couldn't see the upsides to creating a defensible space. And so the purpose of this talk is to really talk about how that creating a defensible space, that first, especially, and I'm really going to be focusing on zone 1 of your defensible space, and to take that first zone and turn it into not only a Firewise landscape, but a water-wise landscape and a people and pollinator-friendly space. So this is really about an opportunity rather than, a terrible thing. So just a quick recap. I know some of you may or may not have gone to the defensible space class last time. So just a quick recap on that. So defensible spacing or Firewise landscaping has to begin with defensible space. And so, and here, we've got the different zones. We've got zone 1, which is the area, including your house and about, 15 to 30 feet away from your house. And then you got zone 2 going out from there. And then zone 3 extends to the end of the property. Some people's properties don't even extend into zone 3. And so in zone 1, again, that's 30 feet to within 30 feet of all of your structures. What your goal is to do is to remove all conifers and shrubs in zone 1. You can have aspen. So I know that there's people in various, elevations here. So if you're at lower elevation, you probably don't want to even be growing aspen, because aspen aren't really happy above or below about 7,500 feet. But if you're above 7,500 feet, aspen you can have within 15 feet of the house. So you don't want to have it, you'd want to have it 15 to 30 feet away. And some people say you could have the aspen a little bit closer, but that's always a little bit of a controversial statement. And also, even though you might be able to have aspen as a Firewise, it would be okay in a Firewise way, it may not be okay with your insurance company. So your insurance company may be stricter than actually the fire science. Within that zone 1, then this is always like an issue with people, that there's a prize tree. There's a tree that is like, you built the deck around, or it's a tree that all the birds come to, or just is such a beautiful character, old growth tree that you really want to keep it, and that's okay. But then if you keep that, you have to make sure that you isolate it so that there aren't any trees within 30 feet. So it basically essentially becomes part of your defensible space. And you still want to prune it to about 10 feet high and remove all lateral which we'll just do a quick recap of what those are. And then just make sure that none of the branches of that prize tree overhang your roof or are within 10 feet of the chimney, just because you don't want sparks from your chimney catching onto that tree. And so, so one of the things that we've really learned about fire science over the years is that fire behaves much less like a flash flood, which I think is how people kind of thought of fires back in the day, that it was just sort of this flash flood moving through the landscape. But it's really not. It's a lot more about, it's very patchy, and it's very, like you don't know where it's going to be. And the fire doesn't even have to come to your property in order to burn down your house. And so the flying embers are what really are the huge problem in a house, in a fire. And so that's what you really have to be paying attention to. And that's why that zone 1 is so important. So this is a little animation about, here's the flying fires, and they land and they act like water. And so they come in and then they'll collect at the base of your house. And so they can set your house on fire, even though the fire is all the way over here. And I've heard people, the fire, you can get flying embers from a fire that is, a half a mile away or even a mile away, depending on the wind and the intensity of the fire. So you really have to be thinking about embers more than almost, well, not almost anything, but you really do have to be paying attention to embers. And so because those embers can fly, and again, they sort of, they'll come out of the sky and they'll, run along your house and they'll collect down here, you want to have a 3 to 5 foot non-combustible perimeter around all the sides of your house. So it can be very utilitarian, like this, and that's fine, but we'll also talk about how to make it a little bit more fun. And, at the very minimum, rake out the area to bare mineral soil and cut the grass. So what you don't want to do is have the embers come down, land, catch high, dried out grass, and then have a continuous run all the way to the edge of your house and then catch your siding on fire. So that's what you really want to avoid. So that's, it's the embers landing, and then it's the continuous grass fire that are the two things that are the most likely to catch your house on fire. So at a very minimum, just make sure that there's, just bare mineral soil right around your house. But it's better to actually put a fully non-flammable perimeter. And then other places to think about are the stair to ground junctions and under decks, because, like you might be doing, you might think about all of this area, but then forget about the stairs. And if your stairs are made of any sort of flammable material, which most of our stairs are, then your stairs can just be a ladder up to your house. So you want to make sure that you include that 3 to 5 non-flammable foot, or 3 to 5 foot non-flammable materials underneath your stairs as well. So here's just some examples of what that might look like. And then also you want to remove ladder fuels from, from being able to catch the trees near your house, particularly again, if you have a prize tree. So like the ladder fuels are any of these low bushes that, can catch on fire. So if ember lands here, or if you have a grass fire coming in, or even like a crown fire, the ladder fuels can catch this and then get up into this tree and then continue the crown fire if it's already a crown fire, or if it's not a crown fire yet, it can get up into the tree and then it can catch other trees and become a crown fire even when it wasn't originally. So you definitely want to avoid crown fires if you can. And the removing ladder fuels from the area around your house can allow the fire to drop down out of the crown, and so at least then it's a lot easier and less intense. So, and also just something to keep in mind is that ground junipers do count as ladder fuel, and they're actually some of the most flammable things that you can have. So that would be something that you really want to be getting out of your zone 1, the first 30 feet around your house. So that's what a ground juniper looks like, in case you don't know what it looks like. So I want to stop here just for questions. So if people didn't do a defensible space class, just quickly before I kind of move into the main part of my talk. Any questions? Who's Mari, you're monitoring the chat, right? Are there any questions in there? And you're on mute if okay, and Mari, if you could just tell me out loud that if there's no questions, so because I don't want to be monitoring the chat box, so please just unmute yourself and tell me that. Okay. All right, so the main reason I developed this is because so many people told me over the years that they just were afraid that defensible space means a moonscape, that they don't like, they just don't like the concept. Like cutting down the trees just seems, it seems so terrible. And so like a good case in point, I saw this in the Boulder Home and Garden magazine back in 2013. And a man had lost his home twice. It burned down twice, one in the Black Tiger fire and one in the 4 Mile fire. And so he was like, I am not going to have my house burned down again. And he rebuilt with all, everything very smart. And it was, but even he admitted that it was devoid of decorative landscaping. And you can kind of see that's really like the house looks great, but the land, not so much. And so this is what nobody really wants to live in. It looks like you're in a perpetual construction zone. So we need to figure out a way to make that better. So it doesn't have to be, that way. You can, so you can actually make your defensible space a place that you want to be if you are creative and thoughtful about it. And that's the whole point of this talk. So that 3 to 5 foot perimeter, which, a lot of people just don't really like the concept of it because, the easiest, cheapest way to do it is just to, put gravel down or rake it out to bare mineral soil. And that's pretty ugly looking. But you can actually make it very functional if you use it as your walkway around your house. So if it's 5 feet away, that's a very comfortable amount of space to walk. You can put down some nice flagstone, and you can actually use this as the walkway around your house. And so normally people will have some, like a little bit of foundation landscaping and then a path. Well, you can just make this your path. And so that's a very natural way to do that. And if you're doing any new construction, that's a really smart way to do it. And, it doesn't have to be ugly. You can actually make it, creative and interesting by using, fun pavers, rocks, bricks, other kinds of things to make it an interesting and attractive pathway. So here's another example of how that might look. And so another concern that people brought up to me over the years is that, okay, so I've taken away all the vegetation around my house, so this was my house and I took away all this ground juniper, which was an excellent thing to do. Very, very smart to do that. But if I do that, my foundation is just going to look ugly or bare. And so, that's the reason that we have this concept of foundation plantings, is because we kind of want to soften that line between the house and the perimeter. And so, so we have these foundation plantings, and junipers are the most common foundation planting, which is, obviously one of the worst things that you can possibly do Firewise. So you could, if you have a foundation like this, which is, very common, you could actually make it, more attractive, put stone veneer on it. So here's some examples of some stone veneers going up. So that would be a way to deal with, you know, just that, especially that ugly concrete area, which is, you know, really common in houses when where the foundation is meant to be hidden with plants. Or, you know, and so instead of putting plants in there, in that, you know, foundation area, you could actually, you know, have put in cool rocks and garden art, and use that, you know, to have non-combustible, you know, rocks, metal statues, you know, even some of these planters with, you know, succulents in them. All of those things can be used to provide interest, and then you could have your walkway. You can kind of see like a walkway further out than that. So that could be a way that you could make your that foundation more interesting. You could also just call attention to the wall itself so that your eye does not go down to that juncture, but, you know, you could put some cool rock art or, you know, metal art or anything non-combustible on the wall to draw your eye up to the wall. And I know for a lot of people in the mountains, you know, and this is one of the things that I taught for years, is that, you know, that microclimate that's provided right next to your house is a really great place, especially on the south side of your house, is a really great place to grow more frost tender plants. And so I get that it can be hard then to lose the microclimate. And so what you can do is put big rocks next to the house and then plant in that little microclimate. So then the rocks become your new microclimate instead of the wall of your house. So you would just plant, you know, at the base or even like in the little nooks and crannies of those large rocks. And, you know, you could put, you know, if you created something like this near your house, you could, you know, have, if you had widely spaced plants that did have a good water content, you could use those between the rocks, but you just would want to make sure that there's, you know, just bare rocks against the actual house itself. So some ideas for that, you know, rock garden area, if you did want to plant in, you know, this area, include Scott sugar bowls. So this is a nice little plant. So I'm going to just be talking about native plants that are really, again, these are all water-wise native plants, and they're also really great for pollinators. And they're beautiful, and so that you can use these plants as your, you know, to provide color and interest in that little rock garden area if you're going to create something like that. So Scott's sugar bowls is great for little bumblebees, and it blooms early in the season and has just charming nodding purple flowers. Orchid or Harebells Penstemon has beautiful large purpley pink flowers and a sky blue or sort of a turquoise blue leaf color, and they're great for early pollinators. White tufted evening primrose has beautiful large white flowers. They are sort of somewhat fragrant at night, and they're very attractive to hawk moths. So that's something that can be fun to watch coming to your plants. Nodding onion is another little rock garden plant that you could actually eat if you wanted to also. So you could plant it near your kitchen where you could snip a little bit of it, but you can also just leave it for the beautiful purple flowers, which is also good for small bees. Desert sandwort looks kind of like a grass until it is blooming, and then it has white flowers. And so this is a nice, very tough, very drought tolerant plant. Lambert's locoweed, also known as showy locoweed, is another beautiful plant. Looks fantastic with the Harebells or Orchid Penstemon, and is great for early pollinators. Windflower is another plant. It comes in two different color morphs, so this bright pink or this kind of creamy color, and it is really good. It blooms you know, fairly early in the season, and it's a really good place for the first emerging bees to kind of hang out because this warms up in the sun. It also provides another season of interest when the seed heads go to a fluffy, you know, they sort of develop this nice fluffy light-catching shape to them. So that's the first 3 to 5 feet away from your house. And let's talk about a little bit further out into zone 1, which does extend to 30 feet. And one of the things I want to talk about again is the upsides to cutting the trees for defensible space, because people often, you know, again, they told me over and over again how much we moved up here for the trees, and, you know, we don't want to cut down the trees. But then I had a lot of people tell me that after they did do some cutting for defensible space, that they found that they had a view that they didn't really realize they had, you know, because suddenly you cut down these trees that were right here, and guess what? You see the mountains. It also can bring more sunlight into the house. If you have trees right by the house, you know, and then you cut them down, then you get more sunlight in. And also, if you want to ever install solar energy, you now won't have the tall pines shading the roof of your house. You might also have fewer rodents and insects in the house because they can't, you know, get in through the vegetation. And you won't have to clean your gutter as often, because that's a very important step in defensible space, is to make sure that your gutter is always clean. Well, if you have a pine tree that's hanging down over your roof, it's going to be shedding all of the needles and branches and pine cones and everything into your gutter, and you're going to have to constantly cut it, cleaning it out. Well, if you don't have any pine trees near the roof of your house, you're probably hardly going to ever have to clean your gutter, which is an upside. And then also, if you cut the trees, then now you can consider putting in patios or you know, non-wood decks, like a metal deck, or just having more functional outdoor space. And you may have to level it, or you may have to create a level deck depending on what your land is, but you now have the room for this. So here's just, you know, again, some more examples. And, you know, here's an example. So if you are going to make a non-wood deck and you do want to use a composite material such as Trex, you do want to make sure that it is rated for, it's actually treated to be fire resistant. So not all of the plastic lumbers are treated to be fire resistant. So make sure that if you do install something with Trex, which can be quite fire resistant, and I'm just using Trex as an example, there are other brands as well. So really the plastic lumber, if you do use it, just make sure it is fire resistant, because if it is not treated to be fire resistant, it actually could be more flammable than wood. And so if you're just cutting down trees, and even if you're not actually deliberately, you know, planning and planting things, it's likely that you'll actually get wildflowers and native grass to come in if you do cut down the trees. So this was at my house when I first moved in. We cut down a lot of trees for defensible space, and we did not plant any of these flowers. They just popped up because now there was light, there was water, and there was, you know, just less competition. And so they just all popped up of their own accord, that, you know, just sowed in from the seed bank. And so that was wonderful. We didn't even have to do anything. But you can also deliberately plant a garden to take advantage of that. So you don't have to rely on just what's there, because not everybody, you know, a lot of times you will find, you know, great plants coming, but, you know, sometimes you want to actually deliberately plant something, and, you know, you can make that area even more enjoyable. And so, you know, here's kind of a little picture of what you could conceive of. You could have your rocks right by your house. You could have a nice little patio with a place to sip some wine. And then here you have your little pollinator garden. And that's pretty, that can be a pretty sweet place to spend your time in the summertime. The other thing that's good about planting a garden deliberately is that it's a lot more likely to be maintained. So you're not going to get like this continuous unmowed grass. So I hope you can all, you've seen enough that you realize that this would be a disaster waiting to happen in a fire zone, right? The embers would land here, they'd catch the grass on fire, they go right up to the house is doomed. So you don't want to have that. And so if you have a garden that you deliberately planted, then, you know, you're probably more likely to, you know, keep it in good shape. So if you do plant a garden and choose your plants well, that can, you know, you can be attracting and supporting pollinators. And again, you can be giving yourself a place to enjoy watching them. And that was one of my favorite things to do at my house up in Gilpin, and now at my new house, is just have planted native plants and just watch the pollinators. I mean, I love watching the butterflies come in. I love watching the bees come in. There's new bees and butterflies that come in when you plant more different, you know, different kinds of plants, and you can just see so much more. And so I love just being able to sit out there and just kind of watch the ecosystem come alive. And by planting those native plants particularly, that's where you're going to be supporting all the pollinators and really giving yourself a lot of pleasure. So some of the general tips I would give for creating the Firewise and pollinator-friendly garden include, do try to keep as much as you can the plants in that first 30 feet watered. Now, I know that many of us in the mountains do not have outdoor watering rights, and that's okay. There are ways around that. So you can direct a downspout into your garden, so it's perfectly legal to attach more of a, a flexible hose and then take it away from your house and put that into your garden. That is a perfectly legal way to do it. And as of 2016, we can actually collect some rainwater. It's not a ton of rainwater, but we can. And so if you have a single family household or a multifamily household with four or fewer units, you can collect rainwater off the roof. You can collect up to 110 gallons at one time. You can't store any more than 110 gallons, so that's the maximum that you can collect, but you can keep collecting 110 gallons as soon as you use it and as soon as it rains. So if it rained every day, which wouldn't that be nice, you could collect 110 gallons every day and use 110 gallons every day. But you can only use it for rainwater from your rooftop of your main residential building, and you can only use it for outdoor purposes. So outdoor lawns, plants, or gardens. Another way to help protect and be more water wise is to use a gravel mulch, and the reason that you want to use you want to use some sort of a mulch or mulch equivalent, because that will reduce the evapotranspiration. And so gravel can be a really good thing to use. So I would use a pea gravel like it is in this picture, and that's non-flammable. You don't want to use some of the traditional mulches that are organic, because those are flammable. So you don't want to use pine needles, you don't want to use wood chips, you don't want to use anything like that, because they are flammable. So you could choose to use a pea gravel mulch, or you could just plant your plants so closely together that they form a living mulch and cover all of the ground, and then you don't need any mulch at all. And if you have a slope, you can still put in a nice garden. Just put in some terraces in order to plant the plants, because if you just tried to plant on this slope like this, all of the water that would hit there would just run off to the bottom, and you would not, like a lot of these plants would just struggle. And so you really do need to terrace it to slow down the water so it just doesn't rush off. And I'm going to argue that native plants are the best choice for Firewise, water-wise, and pollinator-friendly landscaping, because they are adapted to our soils, they're adapted to our crazy weather, they're even fire adapted, and so they're just a really good choice. But when you're choosing natives, you definitely want to be choosing plants that are close to the ground, especially if you're close into your house. So the closer you're in to the house, the shorter the plant should be, and you could get a little bit taller plants as they go further out. You want to choose plants that have a low sap or resin content. So of course, no conifers, and sages can be also a little bit high in the resin content and a little bit flammable. Choose plants that don't shed or accumulate dead branches, needles, leaves, or any sort of debris. And then choose plants that are easily maintained and pruned, and then you want to prune back in the spring. For the most part, you leave the plants up over the winter time. Our fire danger goes down in the winter. It helps with, if you keep the plants up over the winter, it helps with hardiness, and it will also provide overwintering spots for some of the insects, the pollinators that you're trying to cultivate. And of course, native plants, if you choose the right ones, are drought tolerant. Okay, I'm going to take some questions there if there are any.
Hey, Irene.
Yes.
Well,
yes.
I'm here somewhere. Here we go. So a couple questions.
Yes.
Where's the best place to find native plants?
That's always the perennial issue. So if you go to the Colorado Native Plant Society, their website, it's CONPS.org, C-O-N-P-S, which stands for Colorado, NPS.org. And then under the resources, there's a list of wholesale and retail vendors. And so that would be the place, so you can see all of the different you know, people who do sell them. And then the other thing I would say is to ask at every garden center you shop at to include native plants in their selections, because they need to hear from people that that native plants, you know, that we want native plants, because there's a perception on a lot of retailers that, oh, people aren't interested in native plants, you know, and it's partly because they don't look so awesome in a pot in the store. And that's just, you know, because native plants are used to having deep roots and in the ground, and they look much better in the ground than they do in a pot in the store. And so sometimes the retailers have a hard time selling the plants. But if we're always asking for native plants, we will find that the retailers will start to sell more of them.
Great. Another question, why are native plants fire adapted?
Well, because, so they're, and not all native plants are fire adapted, but just because they have, you know, been, evolutionarily, they've been exposed to fire a lot. And so a lot of times, again, they're deep roots, and the other kinds of, the same things that make them drought tolerant can also make them fire adapted. So, you know, so you will see, you know, some plants coming back, like fireweed is actually a great example, and it's not even called fireweed because of the fire adaptiveness, but, you know, it does have a nice deep root system, and it can come back, you know, fairly quickly after a fire. So it's one of those, you know, famous plants. But so there are a lot of the natives that are just more adapted to the fire due to their root systems, and then also just due to being exposed to fires over, you know, millions of years of evolution.
Okay, let's see, one more here. Are any of the rock garden flowers deer or rabbit resistant?
Yeah, so I would say most of the ones that I mentioned are actually fairly deer and rabbit resistant. In fact, I can't think of any of the ones that I mentioned that are really susceptible to any of those. So yeah.
Okay, yeah, and I was just gonna mention to Irene, because I've had a few questions, the recording and presentation will be accessible after the presentation. You'll be sent a YouTube link and the slides. So those things will be available. And I know some of you have had some specific questions about specific plants, and I know Irene is going to get into that. So I'm going to save those until she continues with her presentation.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, because I'll talk. I mean, so the next part. So I'll talk about, you know, some of the pollinator plants now, and then I'm going to talk about plants to attract birds after this section. So those, and then we can, you know, take some questions about that. And I will try, if I can remember, to talk about deer or rabbit resistance, but I may also forget. I can't guarantee anything. Any other questions?
That's it for now.
Okay, great. Okay, so here are some of the plants that are you can use to attract the pollinators. So you can, these are the ones. So again, this is not just for the I mean, it is just for the pollinators, but it's also for your enjoyment as well. And I do want to mention that a lot of the plants that I'm talking about here today, you can actually find. So we developed, there was a cooperative group of us, and we're the group that puts on the Native Plant Landscaping Conference that is going to happen this year. I believe it's on February 27th, and it will be an online conference. So you can get to it from wherever you are. But the group of us who put on that conference, we developed native plant guides for different ecosystems in the state. And so you can find this particular design that, you know, lists all the plants online, and here's the link to it. And so this can actually be, you could use this if you wanted to, or you could just, you know, riff off of it. So one tip that you want to think about is to place shrubs. So again, we don't want shrubs within that first 30 feet, but you can kind of put them right at that edge of the 30 feet of the end of, you know, the edge of zone 1 to kind of provide a protective area and a delineation between your house and then the rest of your in zone 2. And so if you do place shrubs so that they're upwind of the perennials, that can help protect the butterflies and the bees from strong winds. And as we all know, there's lots of strong winds in the mountains. So some shrubs that would line that, again, that 30 feet out from your house that are also very pollinator attractive include rock spray. So this is Holodiscus dumosus. It has a nice spray of flowers that's good for, again, for the bees. And then this turns a nice sort of rusty red in the fall. So it has another season of interest. Chokecherry is one of my absolute faves. This is one of the best host plants that you can get. It has white flowers in the springtime that are fragrant, very attractive to different pollinators, butterflies, bees, and then also it provides fruit for birds, and then it turns a beautiful red in the fall. So that's a multi-season of interest and also fantastic for lots of different reasons. Now, the one thing I have to say about chokecherry is that if you have good soil and good moisture, it can become quite a suckering plant. And so that's just something that you have to be aware of, but it makes a really excellent hedge for that very reason. And so if you are kind of making a little hedge to protect your zone 1, then this is a perfect choice. Golden currant is another 3-season of interest. It has yellow flowers in the springtime, good for both the bees and some butterflies, and then also for hummingbirds. Shrubby cinquefoil, this blooms for a long season in the middle of the summer. It has yellow flowers. Our native one only has yellow flowers. There are some horticulture varieties that have like pink or white flowers, but the native one, the straight species, has only yellow flowers, and it also is good for attracting butterflies and bees, and is also very drought tolerant. Boulder raspberry, you can see how drought tolerant it is here, growing right out of the rock system. Beautiful white flowers, good for a lot of different species of bees, and then also has another season of interest with the sort of peeling, interesting reddish bark. Woods rose has beautiful pink flowers that are fragrant, and again, attractive to a lot of different bees. I haven't seen that many butterflies on them, but I see a lot of bees on them. And they turn a lot of times a reddish color in the fall, and then produce hips that are good for birds. And then also you could eat them if you wanted to. Now again, this is a plant that can produce a lot of suckers. If you have, it can actually kind of become a really almost impenetrable hedge if you have good soil and good water. So be aware of that, but it also can be a really upside if you kind of want a place where you don't want people or animals walking through that. It could be a natural dog fence. All right, so some of the less shrubby ones and the actual perennials include pasqueflower, which is one of my favorites simply because it's one of the first things to emerge in the springtime. I always eagerly await it. Some years we actually even do get it around Easter time, which is what it's named after. But this is fantastic for the early pollinators. So this is, when they're just coming out, the bumblebees are just coming out and they're looking, buzzing all around, trying to find something. This is the perfect landing spot because again, it provides this little sun-warmed nook for them to be in, and tons of pollen and nectar. And then in the later on in the season, they get these fuzzy seed heads that are also pretty cool looking. Golden banner is a great plant. It is a rhizomatous plant, so it can spread. And here's a really spectacular example. In some years it looks really great, and then some years it doesn't look so great. This was actually on my way home, and this is a patch that was I've seen a lot of times, but this particular year it was spectacular. I actually had to stop and take this picture. It doesn't always look this glamorous, but it has really beautiful, bright yellow flowers in the springtime when we really, really need that hit of color. It's great for hillsides because it is rhizomatous. It's not maybe a good choice if you're trying to have a small, tidy little garden, just because it does spread by roots. If you do have a hillside, this is fantastic. And the swallowtail butterflies seem to really love it, and I also see bumblebees coming to it. Bloomis penstemon is also one of my favorites. It blooms about the same time as the golden banner, beautiful blue flowers. These are smaller flowers than some of the other penstemons, and they're more numerous. And it tends to attract the smaller bumblebees and even some of the smaller other native bees. This can, self-seed beautifully, and it's just fantastic in the springtime. And then wallflower. So this is a biennial. It mostly spreads by seed. And so it'll bloom in its second year. It has orange flowers that are slightly fragrant. They're not super fragrant, but they look great with that blue mist penstemon. How's that for a nice color punch in the springtime? And again, I've seen a lot of different butterflies and bees come to them. Sulfur flower is another fantastic multi-season interest plant. It has these sort of yellow-green flowers in the springtime, which is why they're called sulfur flower. It's not because they smell like sulfur, it's actually because just that color is a sulfur color. They are the host plant for a variety of different butterflies, and they're also attractive to a variety of short-tongued bees. They also stay evergreen all winter long, and the leaves turn a reddish color that can be beautiful all winter long. So I think it's also one of our few ground cover type perennials. We don't specialize in that in Colorado, and so this is a really great, sort of ground cover plant. Prairie smoke is another beautiful plant. It can grow in the part shade. It is attractive to bumblebees, and it also gets this nice feathery seed head in the when it goes to seed. And so this has multi-seasons of interest, and but I just think that that's such a lovely color, and it blooms, in the springtime about the same time as the dogwoods and the serviceberry, so it can be a really good good color combination. And I've been forgetting to talk about deer resistance. I told you I might do that. So deer resistant, so penstemons, the golden banner. I have not actually seen too many deer going for prairie smoke, but now I'm trying to remember all of the plants that I just covered, and so I'm sorry, I did not remember to do that. My bad. Silver lupin, which is deer resistant, blooms in the midsummer, and it has a couple different color morphs. It can be anywhere from a deep violet to almost like this pale silvery blue. It's very good for bumblebees, and it's also an easier plant to grow. So some people have struggled to grow like the Russell lupins or some of those other ones because they tend to want really rich soils with a lot of organic matter. Well, the silver lupin can handle our crappy soils. Excuse if that's not a good word to use. Our native yarrow is also a wonderful plant for holding down hillsides. It is another rhizomatous plant, and it has these tiny white flowers that just look very bright and happy, and are good for butterflies and other short-tongued bees. It is now, so some people now put it in Achillea millefolium rather than Achillea lanulosa, so that may be a changing taxonomy. But anyway, this can be, it's very drought tolerant, and if you are attached to your oxeye daisy, which is a noxious weed, this is an excellent replacement for that. Bee balm, and the yarrow is deer resistant, and the bee balm is also deer resistant. And this is a wonderful plant for attracting all kinds of pollinators and providing really good, beautiful pinks in the middle of the summertime. And so, here you got the bees, which, of course, you might guess would be attracted to it by the name bee balm. But here you also have butterflies, so a variety of different insects come to it. And it has a very pungent foliage, which you can actually use as an oregano substitute. And that's what makes it more deer resistant. Pearly everlasting, also deer resistant, is a beautiful plant that blooms in the midsummer. It has a gray-green foliage, which I think is just gorgeous in the garden. And it has sort of these creamy white flowers that will preserve nicely. So you could actually use, if you cut them at this stage right here, you could actually put them in a vase and have them look beautiful for years. And in fact, I did just that. And it was always my emergency flowers when I had guests coming over and I wanted to have flowers on the table, I would just pull the base with the Pearly Everlasting off the table and boom, instant flowers. But you can see that it's also good for butterflies and other pollinators. Black-eyed Susan is a biennial plant, has fantastic yellow flowers. It is deer resistant and rabbit resistant, and it will attract pollinators. It will attract, so it attracts butterflies and bees in the middle of the summer, and it's just gorgeous plant, very drought resistant, and just, I love it. So I highly recommend growing the Black-eyed Susan, and you can easily grow it from seed. Harebells, and so I know I'm becoming this is my favorite plant, but they all are my favorite plants. So I also really love harebells, Campanula rotundifolia. These have just beautiful purple flowers. They go with everything in your garden. They self-seed a little bit, but not very aggressively. And they attract some of the smaller bees. And because they kind of hang upside down, the bees have to, get up in there to get the pollen. But they're beautiful. And just in case anybody is concerned about these are not the same plant as the Campanula rapunculoides, which can be that kind of noxious plant that a lot of times people back in the day planted around their gardens. It has a very similar looking flower, but that one's not native, and it does grow extremely aggressively, and it's very hard to get rid of. But this is not that plant. This is a much better behaved plant, and is just as beautiful. Blanket flower is a fantastic plant in the middle of the summer. It has just such cheery, beautiful flowers, and then also, looks great with some of the other natives, and is good for bees. It actually even, there's some specialist pollinators that come onto it, like the fire moth and other pollinators, but it also will attract butterflies, bees, other plants, and other pollinators. And then sneezeweed. So this one would be a better choice for people who are at higher elevations, so above 7,000 feet. But it's a beautiful plant. Has these bright sort of yellow-orange flowers that are really, just really have a cool color. And again, good for different, for both bumblebees and for butterflies. And it is deer resistant. Showy daisy is in the middle of this, blooms in the middle of the summertime. It can bloom, this can take a little part shade, which can be kind of nice. It particularly likes the shade underneath aspen. And again, you'll see butterflies and bees come to it. Showy goldeneye is fantastic for later in the fall. So, or later in the summer. So this kind of starts to bloom more in August. And it just has tons and tons of yellow flowers and look really great. And I've seen both butterflies and bees come to them. All right, any questions on the pollinators before we go on into birds?
We do have a couple. One is about Russian sage. Someone mentioned that they've seen a lot of Russian sage in their neighborhood. Is that something that is good or should be removed?
So Russian sage, so I'm not going to talk about, I'm not talking about Russian sage just because I'm talking about native plants, and Russian sage is not a native plant. It is, so it is Russian sage can be very good for pollinators, and it is deer resistant, but it is a sage and it's tall. And so it is something that you might not want to put like close to your house. So if you're going to plant Russian sage, it may be something that you want to put more in the towards the end of your zone 1. So that could be one of your shrubs in that zone 1. But yeah, I wouldn't put it right close to your house. And because the higher in elevation you go, the more of a microclimate it needs. So you might not be able to grow it out in like 30 feet away from your house unless you're in a really nice warm microclimate, because it is a plant that prefers a lot of heat. So I'll just say that I was never able to grow it at my house when I lived in Gilpin County at about 9,000 feet because it just didn't get enough heat there. So that might be, just depending on where you are in elevation. If you're seeing it right around where you live, then yes, you could plant it. And again, I just put it out towards the edge.
Okay. One of the other questions, a couple of questions having to do with kind of the mulch concept and how close wood chips can be. If you have stucco, can mulch be closer to the house? So could you just generally speak to
Sure. Yeah.
that?
So I would not put any sort of wood mulch within 15 feet of your house, and I'd prefer to see wood mulch not be within the first 30 feet of your house. And even if you have stucco, you don't want to have anything flammable. So because you know, there can be little gaps or other things that if you had, like, let's just say the wind kind of blows your wood mulch right up against the house, and then often there's this little edge of the house that right under here can be a point where fire can get in. And so if you have the wind blowing the mulch here, the embers land on the mulch, and then the flames can get up and get into the wall of your house. And so that's one of the reasons that you don't want to have anything flammable near your house. So even if you have stucco, that doesn't guarantee that your house is, you know, imperturbable. And so I would be on the safe side. I would not have any wood mulch within 15 feet. And, you know, again, I would just not even do wood mulch. I would do gravel or just do the living mulch.
And then one more here. Would a lilac bush near the house about 15 feet away be treated like a prized tree?
Yeah, so lilac is going to be a little bit, it's not, you know, quite in the conifer territory. It's more like in the aspen, you know, in terms of being, because it has lusher leaves and it doesn't have a lot of, you know, the branches tend to be fairly fine and they don't, you know, tend to accumulate a lot. So I would say you could treat it a little bit more like an aspen, and you wouldn't have to isolate it a full 30 feet, you know, like an actual conifer. But I would still try to make sure that you don't have anything flammable getting up to that lilac. So you still want to kind of remove some ladder fuels and then only have, you know, perennials that are non-flammable, just to make sure that nothing, and then, you know, just that nothing will catch. And then I would make sure that you prune it every spring and just make sure that there aren't any dead branches on the lilac.
Okay, I think that's it for now. Someone did mention they really appreciated the comment about deer resistance. It seems to be.
Okay, yes, I'll try to keep remembering. Just
Sounds good.
Keep it all in my head. So, all right. Okay, so now we're going to talk about birds, because birds are just as much fun as pollinators. And the more I get into birds, you know, like I love both of these in my garden. This is like one of my whole reasons to garden, is to attract both the birds and the pollinators into my garden. And as we all know, I mean, as you know, we're losing habitat and all these things. If we can plant in, you know, if we can replace habitat in our yard for both pollinators and birds, we've done such a good thing, you know. And not only that, but you know, our garden is going to look beautiful. So I just think that this is one of the most positive things that we could possibly do with our yard, is to plant things that will attract and support pollinators and birds. So this can also be found on the extension website. So this is part of that same booklet that, you know, the link I gave you before. And so this is a songbird and hummer haven for the mountains. So one of the things that to remember about birds is that they require insects to fledge chicks. And not only, you know, so, I mean, this doesn't matter if the adult birds are, you know, seed eaters or nut eaters or fruit eaters. 96% of terrestrial birds have to feed their young insects in order to raise their young. And not only do they have to feed them insects, they have to feed them a ton of insects. And so there was a chickadee study by Doug Talmy and his lab, his graduate students at the University of Delaware. And they found out that to raise one clutch of chickadees, it required 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars. And so we have to have a lot of insects in order for us to produce the next generation of birds. Otherwise, all the birds die. And the native plants are the very best things to support this, the insects for the birds, because insects tend to be, so the insects that eat plants tend to be very host specific. So maybe they'll eat just one genus of plants, or maybe even just one species of plants, but they don't recognize non-native plants, such as lilacs, as food sources. And so they won't lay their eggs, or and so then the young will not be able to eat the non-native plants, the non-recognizable plants. They won't recognize them as food. And so you won't be able to have the entire food chain supported. So you won't have the plants, and then the insects eating the plants, and then the birds eating the insects. So we really need to support the birds with insects, which you don't really think about. Like a lot of times we just think about, oh, we want the bird, we want to provide berries for the birds. We want to provide seeds for the birds. And yes, that's great for the adult birds, but we really need to have the insects in order to have next year's birds. So a tip for growing birds is to plant shrubs in a close hedge to provide shelter. So again, that 30 feet away, you can have this nice little edge of shrubs to provide both, shelter and food for the birds. And that's also a great place to plant, or not plant, to put a bird bath. So you put that near the shrubs so the birds can escape into it, but not so close that a cat could hide and pounce on the bird. So you want to have it just a little bit out, but that gives those birds a sense of safety from the cats. So, and then if you have some stepping stones that are going up to the bird bath in order for you to tend it, a great choice for around stepping stones is pussy toes. And so that can also be around flagstone. And pussy toes look beautiful with the flagstone, just that color combination. But pussy toes, they don't really have a lot of flowering. They do have flowers, but they're pretty small and insignificant. And so you really grow them for the foliage, and the foliage looks beautiful year round. So in the shrub category, so again, this is in that kind of 30 feet hedge around your house. Serviceberry is a fantastic plant. So again, this is a 3-season interest plant. It is, I would say this is partially deer resistant, but not necessarily, I would not say it's maybe the most deer resistant. If they're really hungry, they probably will go for this. But it has white flowers in the springtime, and then it produces these blueberries, which are edible, so people can eat them. And but you will have to beat the birds to them. So this is it's a fantastic bird food plant. And so I just leave them for the birds, but you may choose to eat them if you wanted to. And then in the fall, it turns into a beautiful reddish orange color. So it's great multi-season interest plant. So now we have golden currant again, making appearance back from the pollinator. So this is also really good for hummingbirds, but then it produces these black the currants actually range in color from somewhere from an orangish color to a black. So it depends on the individual variety. And these are edible by humans and also very edible by birds. And then the leaves turn a beautiful color in the fall, this nice red color. So again, you got a 3-season of interest. I really love the golden currant for that. And then we have Boulder raspberry back again from the pollinator. So, and it does produce a berry, which is tasty for birds. So that would be, another choice. But, just because all these shrubs are really great host plants for insects. And then the chokecherry is probably the #1 host plant that I could recommend if you want to have, for habitat, is just because it does grow a lot of different insects. But then, so it's got the flowers for the pollinators, and we got the chokecherries for the birds. You can also pick them and eat them. Normally you won't eat them raw, but you could make, pies or syrup or wine from them. And then it also does turn a nice red fall color. So I love the chokecherry. Red twig dogwood is also a really good choice here. The higher up you are, the more drought you know, like the less water it's going to need. If you are at slightly lower end of our viewing range, you might need to do a little supplemental irrigation for this, but in the mountains, it doesn't require, you know, like above probably 8,000 feet, it doesn't require any supplemental irrigation at all. It has beautiful white flowers in the springtime, which are fragrant. And then it develops a white berry, which are good for the birds. And then in the wintertime, it has beautiful red twigs, which is where it gets the name, red twig dogwood, that look great against the snow. And that is deer resistant. And let's see, chokecherry is also moderately deer resistant, but not fully deer resistant. So wax currant, I am not sure about deer resistant. I know it is not moose resistant, but it does have kind of a strong smell to the foliage, and I think that would somewhat deter deer. I am not positive on how deer resistant this is, but I definitely know that the moose would always eat this at my house. But it's still a great plant. It has pink flowers in the springtime, which are actually one of the things that the broadtail hummingbird tracks as it heads north. It kind of follows, or at least it used to. Things are kind of getting out of whack now, but it used to follow the flowering of the wax currant in order to, you know, go north. And so this is a good hummingbird plant. And then it also produces currants, which I don't personally find are very tasty. I think the golden currant has a tastier flavor. Some people like the wax currant. I don't like it myself, but it's good for birds. And then the bee balm, again, we talked about it earlier, but it is really great for hummingbirds. And Colorado columbine, so it's not only a beautiful state flower, it's also good for hummingbirds, and even I've seen bumblebees at it. And then scarlet gilia, this is a biennial plant, and it has, so it'll bloom in its second year. The seeds that you can buy in nurseries and online are mostly the red flowered ones, which are the ones that attract the hummingbirds. But in the, particularly in the Front Range Mountains, you'll see a lot of the white morph. So this actually used to be thought to be a separate species, but now they realize that they're just color morphs of the same species. And so there can be the white ones, and these tend to be a little bit more attractive to hawk moths, and then the red tend to be a little bit more attractive to the hummingbirds, although I've seen both of them go to both colors. And I have found this to be quite rabbit resistant, and I think it's actually even relatively deer resistant. Whipple's penstemon, which is the penstemon that's in that the guide, but you could, if you live at lower elevations, you could just substitute Rocky Mountain penstemon here. But Whipple's penstemon is fantastic in the for the mountains. It's has this beautiful dusky violet color to it, and it does prefer the little bit of the cooler temperatures in the mountains. So I would not, you know, grow it lower down, but it's beautiful, and again has, you know, will attract the hummingbirds to it. And then the showy goldeneye, again, we talked about that earlier, but it's also a fantastic plant for finches. So I've seen, whenever I've had this, I had this outside of my office when I was in Gilpin, and every time in the fall, once it started going to seed, a flock of pine siskins and other finches would just fly off of it. And so it was really fun. It's almost impossible to get a picture. So it's not a really great picture, but anyway, it's the best I could do. But I love this for the birds that it attracts on the seeds, not to mention the flowers. And then the black-eyed Susan, which we talked about earlier, is also fantastic for the goldfinches. So here's a house, and here's a house finch. a Cassin's finch coming to it. So this, and in fact, this is so attractive to finches that I almost never could get this to reseed at my house, because the finches would do such a thorough job of eating all of the seeds that I would have to keep buying seeds and growing them from scratch, because almost none of it reseeded, just because they were so attracted to the seeds. The blanket flower seeds will also are good for bird food. And then the Rocky Mountain penstemon, does have, it's good for the hummingbirds, and then it actually does, the birds can sometimes eat the seeds from the penstemon. So some other things that weren't in that guide would be that you could choose to plant in a bird food garden would be sunflowers. So they are good choices. Obviously, they have nice black oil sunflower seeds, which are perfect for all kinds of species of birds. The blue flax, so I want to point out that you want to be going for our native blue flax, the Linum lewisii, not the Linum perenne. Goldenrods also produce good seeds, and they're really great host plants for insects for birds also. The silver lupin that we talked about earlier is a good seed producer. And then any kind of aster or tansy aster is good for seed production. And then again, if you have aspen a little bit far away from your house, so we want it at least 15 feet away from your house, there's all kinds of insects that the aspen provide, and also the catkins can provide little seeds for a lot of different birds. I always see the red-naped sapsucker come to the aspen around my house every springtime. And then when you get out to zone 2 of your house, so beyond that 30 feet, then the evergreens are really helpful. So that's when having those evergreens in zone 2, the conifers, that's really helpful for the birds, and that provides shelter and cover year-round. So from the snow, from the wind, from the hail, from the rain. And they also produce nuts and insects. So we definitely want to keep evergreens in that zone 2 area. So ponderosa pine, Douglas fir, lodgepole pine, blue spruce, and Rocky Mountain juniper if you live below about 8,500 feet. All right, and that is it. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Irene. That was great. A couple of questions. Are there any concerns about bears with some of the plants you mentioned, specifically serviceberry and currant?
Yeah, so, and then also chokecherry. So yeah, that's a question I always get, and it's not something that I'm personally, concerned about. It is possible to attract bears to the house if these are fruiting. But it's not something that you're going to be attracting a bear to just hang out and camp at your house. A bear may come through, may strip all of your chokecherries off, but then it's going to move on. It's not going to keep coming back. It's not like if you have a trash can that you're perennially putting out and the bear learns, oh yeah, Wednesday morning is when I come to that house and I eat the trash. They'll come and they'll move on because bears know that it's a one-time, so bears kind of understand that fruiting happens once and then they'll go on to some other location. So if you're absolutely terrified about bears, and I grew all these at my house, and actually I still have bears down here too. And I grow them, and I'm not, it's just not something that I'm worried about, but you could also skip some of the, if you're the Boulder raspberry is not going to be a problem because it just doesn't produce enough berries, and they're not, they're generally not all that juicy. They tend to be dry and hard if they're not irrigated. But in the currants, I haven't seen bears come for the currants, but they definitely could come for the chokecherries, and they could definitely come for the serviceberries. So I would say if you're very, very worried about bears, then skip those two. But again, they will come and they will go. So.
Okay, great. Another question was about scrub oak. Someone had a question about replacing scrub oak with some of these plants, and how do you sort of remove what you don't want, which in this case is the scrub oak, and transition to some more of these native plants?
Well, actually scrub oak is native, but it is also a fire, it's definitely one of those fire prone species. And so, so I know that you can, so scrub oak is a little bit on the rhizomatous side. Some people I know just have success with, cutting it down and kind of trying to dig out some of the roots. You can also do, cut it down and do a cut stump treatment with something like like a brush type killer, so when you cut it with a chainsaw, you could put something like a, even actually like a concentrated glyphosate on the cut stump. So it's not something that you're spreading, dripping around everywhere. It's just landing on the actual stump. And then that will keep it from resprouting as much. And so I would say that that would be the first step. And then once, you know, you kind of know that your scrub oak is dead. Now, scrub oak you could keep in after zone 1. So you could just treat it sort of like a conifer. And so just try to keep some of the, you know, the less flammable natives in that zone 1, but then you can keep your scrub oak after zone 2 and further out, because it actually is a really great habitat plant for a lot of other things. You just don't want it in zone 1. And you still would want to make it not have a, like, I don't know how how intense your scrub oak is, but you wouldn't want it to be, you know, just have a continuous block of scrub oak.
All right, another question, and I know you mentioned a lot of these, but this question sort of just keeps coming up. In the 0 to 5 foot range, what are the best low growing ground cover plants?
So those I already, so go either refer to the, you'll have it in your, and so that will be the PowerPoint will be shared, or you can go back into the recording, but I did cover those in that first section.
All right, I think that is the last question that I have. If anybody has any more, feel free to put them in the chat. I did want to mention, and Irene, correct me if I'm wrong, but those low water native plant guides have specifically marked like if they are deer resistant in there.
I don't remember anymore. It's been too long since we wrote them. I need to
pull it up. I'll pull it up while people are potentially asking some more questions.
Okay, yeah, I don't remember.
But that's a great resource for a lot of people's questions, I feel like.
Yeah, I mean, so that would be something, you know, yeah, to refer to. But I would say, like, back to the, you know, low ground cover, you know, just like anything that's, you know, short and not, you know, not resonant. You could use, you know, anything from the pussy toes to the, you know, just the sulfur flower to the Scotch sugar bowls to the, you know, the blue mist penstemon, you know, just all of those kinds of things would be fine in that. But again, you don't want them continuously there. So you can't have a field of those plants in the first 3 to 5 feet. You want to have mostly rock, and you can have the occasional short plant. So you really want to not have too many of those, because, you know, in a really intense fire, they can even carry, you know, flames.
So I was wrong about that. It does not have like deer rabbit resistance. It has wildlife value. So some of the things that, you know, Irene talked about. Yeah, thank you, Karen. And then, okay, so there is one more question. What about creeping grape holly in zone 1?
Yeah, so that one is it has the potential to be a little, you know, I wouldn't put it in the first 10 feet anyway, just because it does, you know, have the potential to carry some flame. It's a little bit woody, and in the winter, you know, like kind of in the springish, the leaves could actually carry a little bit of the fire. So I wouldn't put it close up to the house, but it's still relatively short. And so I think that you could have that in the first 30 feet, but I wouldn't put it in the first 10 feet.
Okay, that's all the questions I have. Irene, thank you so much for your presentation. It was awesome. It was it's kind of great to be thinking about spring planting and flowers and butterflies and bees and birds when I think we're all supposed to get some colder weather here this weekend. So this was a fun thing to talk about. And with that, I think I'll leave it with Sharon to just go over what's coming up next.
Yeah, so thank you, Irene, for sharing all those ideas. You've given me some more thoughts of things I can do around my yard. So always
Awesome.
love getting new ideas. So next week we will be talking about emergency preparedness, both for humans and for livestock. We're very fortunate we're going to have Dr. Reagan Adams come and talk to us about being prepared for livestock, pets, any animals that you're going to have to evacuate. And then I will be presenting on the human side of being prepared. Irene knows this very well, having your go bags, having your grab lists. All of this is what we're going to be covering next week. At the end of the 4 weeks, we are going to send out an evaluation, because we would like to know where you're from and did you get a lot of good information out of this, and also are there other topics you would like for us to cover. So unless Karen or Mari has got any other suggestions, we'll let you leave. And thank you again, Irene, and thank you for all of our participants tonight, and we'll see you next week.
All right.
Great.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Irene.
Yeah. You're welcome. Good night, everybody.